Hello, this is Will Faerber from Art to Ride, and today we're looking at the first submission by Malin of the horse Sandy. Now, the Sandy horse is a very interesting case. She seems to have developed this extreme roach back, which she said started even when she was only 6 months old. And this has been a very difficult horse. A horse like this, in fact, this is one of the most extreme roach backs I've ever seen. I have worked with many horses with roach backs. And they are all certainly helped by stretching. If you see the horse on our site, Fuego came to us with a very roach back, not as bad as this horse, but quite extreme. And we were able to, by getting him to stretch and getting him working over his back, and by working with a very good chiropractor, we were actually able to pretty much get rid of the roach back. So know that that's going to be very important to stretching this horse. As long as this horse, while it's, a horse like this, it's got this strong bridge, but at the other hand, it's very stiff. So while this horse is probably not going to stiffen, it's actually dropping right behind the withers, even though you have this roach back, which has made saddle fit next to impossible, you said, for the horse. And I would certainly think that the biggest issue with a horse like this is just being sure that the channel in the saddle is very, very wide, and wide enough to clear that and give enough clearance upwards to really clear all of that lift in the back. That's that spinal roach there. So there's nothing impeding that or touching on that. So I think that would be the most important thing with this horse. I'm not sure this gallop saddle is going to do the horse very good, because it doesn't look like it's going to support your weight very well. So when we're there, I can certainly talk about it, and we can try to do things a little differently and see if we can find a way of getting your saddle to work better on the horse, or talk about one that might be better for it. But we can see with this horse behind how stiff these hind legs are. This horse really has that look like I'm pulling up out of, like it's pulling its legs up out of mud, and there's almost no flexion in the hocks at all. This is a horse that's going to be extremely important that we get this horse stretching, and you really start to try to help the horse, which is not only in the walk are you getting some good work out of this horse towards the very end of this session. So that's really where we need to start, is doing more of that. This is a horse I probably would want to put in a shambone, because it really needs to stretch that back out a great deal if we can't get it to stretch without the shambone. But I think that would be the best way to go with this horse. As soon as you go into this trot, this horse is just very, very stiff. So again, we see how these hind legs are just barely flexing. They're barely being able to pull that. Now watch very closely as it walks away. You see how the hocks are twisting to the outside as this horse walks. That's a big sign of weakness in the horse. While this horse looks like a big horse, and his belly is kind of pulled up, almost kind of too much. I almost get the feeling that you've done too much fast work with this horse, and it strikes me as a horse that's aerobically fit, but in every other way it's very, very stiff and not really working over its back at all, because the neck is so truncated into the body. So there's some moments here towards the end of the thing when you get the horse to finally stretch out in the walk that it looks a lot better, and I'll point out those moments as we get there. But I really think the shambone would be the way to go with this horse. Even the trot work and the canter work is all very stiff. The neck is very pulled back into the body. Horse is very much pulling with its shoulders. Like when you see a horse walking like this, and you see how it pulls the head up almost every stride, the horse is really just pulling itself along by its shoulders. It's really not doing anything. The back end of this horse at the moment has nothing to do with how the horse is moving forward. It isn't propelling it forward at all. It's just dragging the hind legs along with it. So that will ultimately lead to some very bad things happening with the horse. I said, this kind of horse, because it's so roached back, it's probably not going to have a sway back, but for itself, it's probably dropped behind the withers there, and I can't see the horse because it has a saddle on, but I can tell already looking at that saddle, I have a feeling it's going to be sitting down too far on the horse's back. But we'll take a look at that when I see it, and that also may be a little bit part of your problem, trying to find the right saddle fit. As you said, you've had other saddle fitters look at the horse, and this is the best you've been able to come up with. So we'll see what we can do when I see you there, but it looks like the saddle is very low on the horse, the low point in the saddle, and it looks like a very flat saddle. That is, it has not a seat, and I have a feeling it's going to be very narrow in the channel as well. So we'll have a look at that when I see you. In the meantime, like with these side reins, this isn't really doing anything. The horse has got its head over, but you can still see how the underside of the neck is still what really is working there. Walk is improving here a little bit. But I would want to see, if you're going to use side reins, they need to be much longer on this horse. And that's pretty good when it drops down there a little bit. But it's going to curl behind the bridle, which is kind of what it's doing there. So Once again, I think the shambone would be a much better way to go with this. The horse isn't really stretching into the contact the way we want it to, and we need to get this neck. This horse's neck needs to be a foot longer too than it is right now, and you do get that at the very end. So you're getting some good work. It's just that we have to get that to be all of the work. The problem is that we're doing too much trotting and cantering with the horse stiff, and which isn't really helping you. It makes the horse more aerobically fit. But the horse never really settles into the gait. The only place it even nearly settles is toward the end, and into the stretch in the walk is the best thing that he does. So what you got going on there, the way I would start with this horse, when I see you, I will work this horse in hand and get it much deeper into the stretch in the walk before we even start the lunge line work. So basically all we're seeing here, what we saw in the other direction, was just a very stiff horse kind of walking along, nodding its head up and down. This would be another one of those horses that if we can get it straightened out, and of course a horse with an extreme back as this one has is going to be a challenge, because that roach in the back makes the horse very stiff through the back. And once again we see how the hind legs are just barely stepping, really not any flexion in the hock. The hind legs aren't moving the horse forward. It's basically just snagging with its front legs and pulling itself forward a little bit by its shoulders. Once again, that's why you see, whenever you see horses that are ewe-necked, that's what they're doing. That's what causes that underside of the neck to develop, because the horses pull with their shoulders instead of working over the top line. And once again, we see how the back end is just kind of falling out behind it. Those hind legs aren't really doing anything in terms of moving the horse. They're just, like a trailer behind a car being dragged along behind. So that looks a little better there. And what you will see in the very end, when you finally get this horse to stretch all the way, as down as far as you get it to go, that you'll notice that the twist, and I'll point that out when we get there, the twist in the hind legs is not as bad. I've dealt with many horses with crooked legs, roach backs, you name it, splay-footed, paddlers, and all the above. And what I have come to the conclusion after working all those horses is that it always improves them. That is, that swing out to the outside of the hocks as the horse walks will improve as you get the horse over its back. For some reason, that's kind of why some of that happens. The horse really can't work through its back, so it tries to push off its back, and all that really happens is the hocks spin to the outside. See how that's happening there once again every time the horse steps. Now the horse is built a little bit that way, but once again, all of these conformational issues will be improved a great deal on any horse by getting them over their backs. If you take a horse that really paddles, like a lot of the older Andalusian breeds, I'm happy to say with the Andalusians that they've bred these new PREs, and they've bred a lot of that out of them. They have much more natural gaits. And of course, the Lusitano horses have always had better gaits in terms of purer gaits than the Spanish horses, though they're essentially from the same lines. But the Portuguese always bred for straighter, more truer gaits. Not so much flash. And once again, as you see the horse drop its head down a little bit, that improves a great deal. And watch right there, as the horse puts its head down, the hocks don't twist as much. What I feel like with a shambone would get this happening a lot sooner, and of course that's never happening in the trot. So that's why we don't want to do a lot of trot work. You got to remember that every step you take with the horse in the wrong frame is just breaking the horse down. Remember that getting a horse over its top line is what puts the shock absorbers on the horse. So every step that you take, imagine galloping a horse. Imagine driving your car with no shocks on it at high speed. What would happen? Well, the same thing happens to horses. They just fall apart. They have much more tendency to have accidents. If you step in a hole, they're going to fall down with you. And speaking of which, someone asked me the other day about this in the video. If you happen to hear this, I was talking about Bill Steinkraus, and I guess I never finished this. The point was, but if you go online and look for any videos by William Steinkraus at the George V Cup, where he won that, and halfway around the course, the horse falls all the way down to its belly. Bill just drops the reins and sits right there in the middle of the horse, and the horse just is able to right itself, get up, and jump a 6-foot fence in 2 strides later, and then to go on and win the George V Cups. And this is back when, when Grand Prix was really Grand Prix, when the fences were at the top of the standards instead of what we see in America now, where everything has been brought down. Now, I am for bringing the heights of these things down, but not just because the riders are riding badly and can't do the big fences. Seeing here with the canter, it's just very stiff, very much pulling with the shoulders. You can see the horse's head is up in the air. It's not as disconnected as many, however, that I see. but still, this is way too disconnected to do much of it. Because once again, remember every step you take. As the horse increases speed, the pressure on the horse's front legs increases to the point where at a gallop, a horse has something like 5,000 pounds per square inch on its front leg. So you can imagine the damage that does if the horse is not working over its back. All the concussion of movement goes directly into the hard tissue. That's why we see so many horses being retired at such a young age, being forced into phony frames and then asked to do all these things. It's a testament to the breeding of the horses today and how much it has improved. We're breeding these super horses that should be phenomenal and should last for years. But yet we're seeing more horses injected today than we've ever seen before. So if these horses have such great conformation, why is it that they're all falling apart at such a young age? And that is just the reason. They're never getting worked over their backs. And so, yes, they get along fine. We looked at one today where somebody was looking at a sale horse, and they showed the horse from 3 to 5 years old, and as it went on, it just got worse and worse. The horse looked pretty good as a 3-year-old and had lots of potential, but by 5, it was completely hollow, head up in the air, and looked very irregular, and got hollower and hollower. It looked like it was starting to develop kissing spine, and that was only in 2 years of bad work. So now the horse is a 7 or so, and you see it's already on its way out, so to speak, and that's not what we want to see. A horse at 7 should just be coming into being full grown. So this canter, while it may get the horse a little more active, in my opinion, it's much too stiff to be doing much of. The horse is never really getting its neck out there. It's still just ewe-necked, as you see the underside of the neck there. Now, the good thing is it's not disuniting itself, which a lot of these horses would be doing. But yet, at the other hand, once again, a couple of strides. Now, if you feel like you need the energy, to get the horse maybe moving a little forward, that helps you. And you might want to let the horse canter a little bit. But remember, every time you canter the horse just to let off steam, you're basically just wearing the horse down. Like, to me, this horse looks already like it's too fit for the level of its work, and you may want to just let that down a little bit. Once again, remember, every time you canter a horse, if you canter it hollow, you're doing a great deal of difficulty, damage to the horse's legs, as well as you're getting it more aerobically fit, which is what happens when we canter horses. They become more and more aerobically fit. So just because the horse is aerobically fit doesn't mean it's correctly trained. It just means it can go a long time, but they go a long time, but only for a while. Then pretty soon they start to have soundness problems and all these issues that we see. Now that's a little better stretch, and that's the best thing that we've seen so far. Now right there is a little better. So what I would suggest, if you feel like you need that canter, just do a couple of circles around and come right back to the trot. Don't keep cantering and cantering and cantering. So that's certainly better here. So again, I feel like if you got a shambone on this horse, and once again, look at this trot here, which looks pretty good, but as soon as you get on this horse, this all falls apart, and the horse just is hollow the whole time you're riding the trot work. And that's not what we want to see. So once again, we want to work the horse where we can. If that means only on a lunge line, then work it correctly on a lunge line, and pretty soon you'll be able to work it correctly under saddle. So to me, this horse needs more time in the groundwork, getting consistent. And that actually got to be a pretty good trot. Didn't stay there consistently in the stretch, and that's why I would suggest putting the shambone on the horse. And you see the horse just kind of stops hollow, and the legs are flayed all over the place, and it goes back to its ewe-necked position. So a shambone will really help you to get this horse stretching out and get it consistent, so that we want to have every step we take be a productive one instead of one that's just tearing the horse down. And even if we use, as you did, the canter there to get the horse a little more active, that's fine, but don't do so much of it. A couple of circles around, and you did get a pretty decent stretch after it was the best thing that we saw on the horse, and it actually got almost consistent there. So that was good, and that moment when the horse was stretching there in the trot, that's the only time that during this lunge work so far, the horse has been in a position that's actually going to help it. Now, I would like to see you just drop that whip down all the time and not do that thing of holding the whip straight up like a fishing pole. That's not, we have to have it where we can use it. It's just like your legs. If they're not where you can use them and they're in some other position up on the shoulders or something, as for people who ride in a very chair seat do, it's not, your legs aren't there where they need them. So this thing of holding your whip straight up in the air, it's not where you need it if you need to send the horse forward, though this is better now. Coming back this walk again, we see how irregular the walk is, though this is a little better than it was in the other direction. The horse is starting to stretch its neck out. but we're still seeing that same irregularity, that same kind of stuck in mud kind of look behind. Walk is very slow. So if we had the shambone on the horse, you'd be able to send the horse more forward, and it would help you to help the horse to stretch up through the back and stretch the whole length of its back. And remember, we're talking about the entire top line, which goes from the pole all the way back to the dock of the tail. Now, while those are different muscles, they all conjoin to work together. So we don't really need to know every name of all of those muscle groups that are in there. We need to think of it as just one long thing, like a bicep, like you're starting to get the whole top line to light up consistently, like you would if you were flexing your bicep, so to speak. And even that is a good example. What you can do, try flexing your bicep and then hold your fingers around like about a third up on your bicep and squeeze it a little bit and see if you can flex your bicep. You can't. And that's what a bad saddle does to horses. It keeps them from being able to use their backs correctly. That's why it's so important. I'm always amazed at how many people will go out, and buy some absolutely horrible cheap saddle to ride their horses that they spend a lot of money on, and then wonder why the horses don't go well. Well, if you're going out to play tennis, you would want the best tennis rackets you could get. You wouldn't want to go learn how to play on your uncle's old wooden racket that was in the closet for 10 years and completely warped and had the strings had lost their tension on them. Well, that's the same thing true of horses. So this trot looks a little better in this direction, still not stretching all the way down. You see how the horse counterflexes. Now that's a little better there. And look how every time this horse's neck goes down a little bit more, how much more even the horse looks in the stride, where it starts to look pretty good. Like that. That's the closest he comes there. Like that. That's the kind of trot we have to get under saddle, or the work under saddle is just really not any value, and all you're really doing is just breaking the horse down. So we need to spend more time with this one on the lunge line, get him stretching more consistently, and then you'll see the gaits becoming more even, and you will, I believe, begin to see an improvement in the roach-back. Now that's really quite good. If you had that under saddle, it got a little hollow there again, it came up a little bit, but that's starting to look pretty good. But we would like that there, when you see it stretch down, all of a sudden you see all of the muscles of the top line light up at the top of the neck, and we see how the underside of the neck becomes soft. There isn't any time that we want a horse to be ewe-necked or to engage those underside of the neck muscles. That has nothing to do with it. And every time it does, it simply tells you it's reverted to working with its shoulders and pulling with its shoulders. So that's an improvement there. Once again, I'd like to see the side reins even longer then, so as the horse goes down, it has longer to stretch into if you're going to use the side reins. Though I really recommend the shambone with this horse because it really needs to stretch more than it's doing and get there consistently. So you got to look at your percentage of time. So far, we've seen all this lunging work. It's been almost 18 minutes now, and we actually saw about 20 seconds of good work in one direction and 20 seconds of good work in the other direction. So we've got to change that around to where we get the horse over its back right away in the beginning of work. If you've done your groundwork correctly and you get a horse working over its back, you get on them and you just kind of ride away because they've already learned to accept contact with the bridle. They've learned how to use the correct set of muscles before we get up there, because as soon as we put weight on the back of a horse, it's going to make its job much more difficult. And remember, our job of a trainer is to let the horse regain its freedom of movement by correct training that it would have without a rider on. And that's when we get that wonderful feeling that we're really flying, that the horse lifts us up into the air and, of course, becomes a willing participant. No horse that's hollow ever really becomes a willing participant. Yes, you can force horses to do all kinds of things, but the question is, should you? And, of course, the answer is no. So starting off with the walk here under saddle, once again, we see the same thing. You see how, now here you can really see the twist in the hocks. You see how when the horse moves, how it twists those hocks? That tells me right away that the horse is really not working over its back, and also that it's very weak in the back. So just because this horse is a little different than others, it's not sway back because it's so roach back, but it's very stiff in the back. And I'm sure we would see if we took the saddle off of this horse the way its back looks there. I'm very curious to see this horse without the saddle on to see how the shape of the withers is and right behind the withers. So here, very hollow, ewe-necked. Once again, we see how the horse is just pulling with its front leg, but you do a good job of getting it back down there. You have some good moments, but it's too much, it takes too long to get to those moments. In my opinion, I would keep to the walk work with this horse and just get it on the shambone and get it really stretching before you do much more trot work under saddle, because that's just wasn't happening at all here, as we'll see as we go on here. But the walk here is improving, so you're starting to get a little better walk. The horse is not really stretching out the whole base of the neck, and of course every time something goes wrong, it just throws its head right up in the air, so it isn't consistent. But that's good. You did a good job of bringing it back down again. Of course, remember that the hands have very little to do with getting a horse to stretch. It has much more to do with keeping the horse coming through from your leg in the correct manner. Always remember that forward means to engage forward under the body. It does not mean to run forward fast. That's the biggest misconception that I see in riding today, as I see people, oh, I'm getting my horse forward, and here they are racing around the arena completely upside down. That's not what it means to be forward. Forward means to engage forward under the body, as I said. And that can only happen if the horse is lifting its back. So that's why we just really take our time in the beginning with horses and don't try to force this work or ride too soon, because when you do, it only sets everything back. Especially if you have horses that have, some kind of physical difficulty, as this one does. It's going to be even more important. So you see how lateral the walk is here? It's moving both legs on the same side at the same time almost there as it gets hollow. That's what happens when horses are hollow. That's also why we see all these Grand Prix riders, especially the roll advocates, are trying to have the walk taken out of Grand Prix, which we must never let happen. Because the walk, more than anything else, tells you exactly what is happening with the horse. If your horse has a lateral walk, it hasn't been trained correctly. I don't care how much piaffe and phony passage it can do. So remember, just because a horse can do something that looks like a piaffe doesn't mean that it is a piaffe. It's hollow in its back, it's not a piaffe. If it's not pushing off the ground to push the body into the air, it's not a piaffe. If all it's doing is standing there and stomping its legs up and down, that is not what a piaffe is. And unfortunately, horses that do that should be given zeros. It's just like any horse coming into in dressage today, they have this idea, oh, well, 5 means sufficient. Well, sufficient means getting over the back. So in my opinion, a horse that's not over its back should get a 0, because it's not actually doing, like if you come in and it says working trot, and you come in hollow, and they still give you a 4 or 3, well, it's still making you think you did something right. But if the horse is not over its back, you're not in a working trot, which means it should get a 0. But that's been the biggest problem with showing, because remember, the show people and the show organizations and the corporate people who run the horse shows now, who make fortunes off of running thousands of upside-down horses over jumps and through dressage courses, they don't care. They just want more people paying their fees. And of course, what exacerbated this when back in the 80s, the AHSA over here was sued because a certain person didn't get on the Olympic team, who felt that she should have because she'd won all these points. Well, this is what we have now, and she won that case, sadly, at the expense of many, many horses. So what we have in the United States is, if you simply, whoever can rack up the most points is going to get these positions for the team and this kind of thing, which simply means if you can't afford to spend $1 million to ship your horse all over the world, there's no way in the world you're ever going to be considered for such things, no matter how good you are. And this is what we have to stop. Or, if it were something, if people are doing something wrong, now that looks good there, it starts to stretch down. Now that's what I'm talking about. Now this is the time when that's the best the horse gets, right there, and it gets all the way down there. That's what we're looking for. Now look at the hocks now. You see how they're a little straighter. They're not bending to the outside so much once you get that. So always study your horse's hind legs. What are the hind legs doing? Not what the head and neck is doing. The head and neck is just an expression of what the rest of the body is doing. And of course it's relative to conformation. So a horse with a really straight out of the neck headset like this horse is, this is not a horse that has a big giant sloping shoulder where the neck comes straight up, like a Frisian, or the way these most expensive dressage horses are being bred these days. They're being bred more like saddlebreds, and of course they look more like saddlebreds, which of course is the antithesis of dressage. Sadly, many dressage riders and trainers today don't really see, I grew up around saddlebreds and Tennessee walkers, and my father started pointing out to me the horrors of these things from a very small child. So maybe I have a little more sense of it than the others, and a lot of you in Europe have never seen those kind of horses, though you have other ones that are the same thing, these Icelandic horses and things that do their tolt and their running walk and all this stuff. And the answer to those, someone was asking me that question the other day. Yes, 5-gated horses are just a joke. All those artificial gaits are things you create by hollowing the back of the horse. It's as simple as that. That's how you create abnormal gaits, which is all those things are. So here we're just running. It's not too bad. The horse is just flipping its head down, back and forth, but it's not really stretching out through the back. And that's what we have to get happening before this trot is going to get. Now that's a little better right there. You see, we have moments where it gets a little better. Now, one thing I would like to see you do, you're leaning forward a little bit here, and I know, and that's okay if you have a very short length stirrup, but if you feel like you have to support yourself on your knees when you bend over, your stirrups are too long to ride over in like a 2-point position, but you should always ride shorter with young horses. So here the horse is quite quick, it's just kind of running, you're getting a few moments like that where it gets a little better. But it still needs to be much deeper, and as sort of the horse just keeps tossing its head up, which tells me it hasn't really found that position over the back. Once they really find that comfortable position, they want to go there. So know that this becomes easier and easier as we go. Now, once again, we can see how far the hind leg is out behind the body in all this trot. So it's not really working through the back, which is why you still have the flipping of the head up and down, and you're having a lot of difficulty maintaining it because it's never really getting all the way there. But you're certainly on the right track here. We just have to get the work over the back happening a little sooner and not spend so much time with the horse not in a good position. So my goal is to try to take every step with the horse. That's why I said for you, the first thing I would start out doing is working this horse in hand, teaching it to stretch deeper into the contact, maybe putting a shambone on the horse to lunge, so that we get it more consistent in the stretch to while it learns. It usually doesn't take very long. Once horses get the stretch, as you've seen with many of mine, we lunge them with nothing at all on. But they have to get that first. And sometimes with ones that have been very stiff for a very long time. Same thing here. That's why this horse is just bouncing on and off the contact there, and all of a sudden the head tosses up. Because you're not ever really getting the horse long enough in the neck here in the trot to let the horse really conjoin its two ends. And remember, that's what the lifting of the back does. It allows the horse to work. It allows the horse to work both ends together, so everything is together. We never want to separate one part of the horse from the other. And that's what we see in some of these new, so-called new methods of teaching horses piaffe and passage, where people are whipping their front legs and getting them to stomp one leg. That does not lead to a horse that pushes off the ground in the piaffe. That just leads to a horse stomping its feet, and shows how completely backwards the thinking is. It amazes me that the United States equestrian team has an official, I call him the official leg whacker, who comes out and whacks these horses. I observed one of these clinics, and it was the most horrible thing I've ever seen in my life, where 10 riders stood in a line for 30 minutes at a time without moving on their hollow-backed horses, and the guy took them one at a time and started whacking their front legs. That's pathetic work. So what we need to do here is just go back and get this horse much rounder. I'm glad to see that you didn't do a lot of canter here at the mounted work. We did get to a good place in the trot work after that little bit of canter. And once again, at the very end here, we get a little better length of stride in the walk. We just have to get this happening sooner and not spend so much time cantering and trotting the horse not in the right position, taking more time with that. And even if that means doing nothing but walk the horse for a while. Because as you said, the horse, tells me also the horse is getting a little hyper fit, because she says 2 or 3 days, every 2 or 3 days, the horse is very hyper like this if she gets it a few days off. And so that's all part and parcel of the same symptoms of the same thing. Just the horse not working over its back, not being, that's not to say that any horse that's been in for 3 days, you bring them out, they might be a little higher. But once again, with a horse like this, if we let them run around, every step they take hollow and not working up through the back just exacerbates our problem and creates soundness problems. So that's why we must be very careful. Unfortunately, the soundness problems come, people get along with riding, or they think they're doing great. They go to a few horse shows, and unfortunately the horse show people, let them win ribbons with their upside down horses. So this only encourages them to do more so. Better walk there. And once again, notice how every time the horse gets further down in the stretch, we see that the horse starts to swing, like right there. That's the best walk ever that we see with the horse. So that's good. You get to a good place by the end, but we need to get there in the first 5 or 10 minutes, so we're not spending 25 minutes just having the horse upside down. So really great work here by the end of this. That's where we want to see it. I look forward to seeing you in about a week. and all our friends in Europe. This is Will Faerber from Art to Ride.